Hello, I'm Graham. I'm the developer of Psychological First Aid, a 4-hour interactive process and program to enable people to gain an understanding and some basic tools to provide first intervention support for somebody who may be experiencing some sort of mental health distress. Now, my background comes from very early on in the 60s, growing up in Auckland. I lived in a street called Oakley Avenue. At the top of our street was Oakley Hospital and Carrington Hospital, which were huge mental health institutions of the day in Auckland. As a youngster walking to a place called Point Chevalier on a Saturday to go to the movies, we were never allowed to cross the road to go near the fences of what was a big farm in those days. The fear and the stigma was massive, and used to get teased as a young kiddie about coming from Oakley. Later on, I joined the ambulance service in Auckland, started my career in Auckland, and interestingly enough, took people to Carrington, and the occasional person took to Oakley, which was the forensic unit. Interesting, throughout that institution no longer exists, the Carrington. It's now an educational institute, which kind of suggests that we've come a long way. But we haven't come far enough, nowhere near far enough. We've had decades of not talking about suicide. Now, quite clearly, despite what some research suggests, is that not talking about suicide has not worked. We continue to see suicide at alarming rates, and the silence is deafening. Interestingly enough, throughout the years, talking therapies have been known to have significant influence on assisting people who are experiencing mental distress. But for some reason they excluded suicide from that process. So utilising the knowledge and understanding I have and developed through 2 decades in the ambulance service as an advanced paramedic and aeromedical specialist, I also was an adult educator for 4 years, responsible for the education of adults throughout the central North Island of New Zealand. In 2001, however, as a result of the paramedical work I did, I took my own life. Now you may wonder, well, that's a bit strange because here I am talking to you now. But in all seriousness, my life ended that day. And from then, I've had to rebuild my life. In much the same way that if I'd had a heart attack and ended up in intensive care and had a year of rehabilitation, I'm left with a damaged heart. I'm left with a damaged psychology. I live with depression and managing depression and PTSD and so on. I know, like if I'd had a heart attack, that if I don't manage what I do, it will kill me. That is just the fact of life. So after my hospitalisation and over a year or more of recovery, I ended up picking up a job as a role with the Southern District Health Board as a non-clinical advisor to the mental health services, called a consumer advisor. So I was able to utilise my lived experience, my knowledge of adult education, as an advocacy role within the senior management team around service delivery. I also had a role with the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists in a similar vein, more of a part-time role, but involved going to Australia probably every 6 weeks to participate in various committees, whether it be the What Works committee, to being a part of the committee that developed competency-based training and assessment for overseas trained doctors. Through these particular roles and responsibilities, became very clear that we didn't have a process in New Zealand to educate the public around mental health and how that the public can interact with people to assist them if they're experiencing some form of mental distress. Some distress is just, we'll not call it ordinary, but sadness is an ordinary experience. What we're really exploring is when an abnormal event creates an abnormal response, or a normal event creates an abnormal response. We do expect that we have abnormal events, there is a certain response, and that's normal. Often we look at it as being abnormal, but actually it's quite normal. So the psychological first aid is also developed around the New Zealand context. And it's very different to the Australian context of mental health service delivery, where the majority of their services are privately based and funded through their health schemes. New Zealand, we don't have that. So access is different. All of the other first aid courses, mental health first aid courses that are currently available, utilise Australian systems and processes. So contextually, they don't sit well and don't fit well with the New Zealand context. The course that I developed is designed and developed for the New Zealand context, for all adults, not just managers, not just other people of so-called importance, but all people. 18 years and up can learn something and develop a strategy to assist people. It's based on a Kamatua's response to me many times about, he called it knowledge, understanding, tolerance, acceptance. It is only with knowledge that you can then develop and engage and create understanding. Now, understanding is part of the problem that people have when they don't understand something, they tend to shy away. Understanding can then lead to tolerance. We can then accept people for who they are and what they're experiencing, for example, which is where the acceptance comes in. So it's developed in that concept. It's a 4-hour interactive course. Now what I mean by an interactive course is everybody gets a nice first aid manual with all of the information, psychosis, what is it, and depression and so on, and some treatment options and how to assist. But the 4-hour process is where the participants can engage and ask the questions that are really on their mind. So if the participant group has suicide as an area they want to explore and it gets gain more understanding about, there'll be a bit more of a focus on that. And it's the same whether it's depression or anxiety or sadness or whatever it may be. But the participants guide the discussion that ultimately takes place. We cover all of the topics, but it's kind of, the focus may be different. And this is the skill of the assessors that are currently available throughout New Zealand. So it's really important that you understand that psychological first aid is not a treatment process. It's merely a process where a person can gain some knowledge, some understanding, gain some basic tools to assist somebody when they're in distress. But also a different point that, again, nothing else in New Zealand is currently available, is this is the only course that I'm aware of that has been developed by people with the assistance of clinicians with the lived experience of mental illness. So it has a particular perspective. The perspective is gained from people like myself and others who I've engaged who have the lived experience, who are able to express these are the kind of things that would be useful. So I do encourage you to take a moment and look at psychological first aid and how it may assist you or your friends or others. Feel free to check us out on the website, psychologicalfirstaid.co.nz, and feel free to make contact. And thanks very much for listening to this web presentation, and I look forward to meeting you at some stage. Thank you.